On this edition of the program, panic! Ah! We talked to a logistics expert to get the real scoop on tariffs. We talked to our friend JD Durkin to hear what the street is saying. Which way, Trump? A golden age of global trade or an isolationist tariff future? We try to get to the bottom of it. And hopefully this comes out before he decides. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for April 9th, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you. This is going to be out a little earlier on Tuesday the 8th, simply because I don't think the information that we are going to give you on this podcast is going to keep all that long. Things are moving fast, and yet they are moving mysteriously. As I talk to you right now, the New York Stock Exchange is about to open. It will likely be down again. And yet, we have a White House that seems to be sending different messages. Are the point of the Liberation Day tariffs to keep the United States within itself, to onshore all manufacturing for American goods that had been sent overseas? Something that I personally think is kind of ridiculous. Or is it a gambit? Is Donald Trump unplugging the world's economy and then daring everybody to believe that he won't plug it back in unless they give him things? That is the central question that we try to get to in our two interviews today. And let's start with the first. This is one of our good pals here. He has been around our community for a very long time. Big Jim, the trade nerd. Let's go ahead and welcome him in. There's much we don't know, and there's more that we can't know until certain people decide. But there is the basic laws of international trade for which we can familiarize ourselves and get some sense of what the consequences of these tariffs are. And for that, we bring in international logistics career expert, Big Jim. How you doing, buddy?
It's just another lovely day in trade, Justin. Just another lovely day in trade where nothing's changed. Everything's great. You know, reciprocal tariff, steel tariff, automotive tariff. Oh, God, help us all. No, it's everybody in our industry right now is pulling their hair out. Everybody in our industry is asking, what does this mean to me? I've got nothing but phone calls repeatedly saying, what do I do now? What's this? What's this? What's that? And it is, it's a mess. I want to say it's fun. It's not fun. It's just a flat out mess right now. It's just a mess.
So let's just, for the very, very, very basics, right?
Sure.
But what I want to do with this episode is, try to get a sense for people what this is, who pays for it, how it affects things. Because right now we are looking at these decisions through two very loud, very hyperbolic funhouse mirrors. And that is politics on one hand and the stock market on the other hand. It's not to say that those aren't important. They are, but also there is a real element to this. So from your perspective, as somebody who your job is to figure out how somebody in America can get something from somewhere else into America, what was the world of tariffs before and where are we now?
Okay. So I think we need to preface this by saying this is being recorded on Monday, April 7th.
Yes.
At 12:08 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time. because
I think we will almost assuredly be doing one of my Trump era prefaces before this interview, explaining what
everything
has changed.
changes
Yes.
at the moment of a heartbeat. So in the before times, typically what would happen is a company would look to try and figure out where it was going to get the best cost of manufacturing. That includes raw materials. Yes, labor is involved with it, but a lot of it has to do with raw materials, raw material acquisition, logistics costs to get those raw materials. What is the cost of capital equipment manufacturing, things like that. And then they would look at what makes the most sense and to build where. Sometimes it is cheaper to build in a place like China where you have very low labor rates and high logistics frequency, where you have boats, literally 5 to 10 boats every day leaving for either the US or Europe. So high frequency, China made a lot of sense. If you wanted to try and avoid China for whatever reasons, you had other opportunities and other options. Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Taiwan, Thailand, Korea, many other options there. And you would pay what's called the column 1 duty rate, which is the standard duty rate. So getting back into the very, very basics of customs, when you're looking at what's called the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States, it's a multi-thousand page book, literally, that has basically everything categorized into what we call a tariff number. You have 3 predominant columns. Column 1, which is our friend's rate, right? This is what we charge everybody roughly. You have what's called the special column, which is technically part of column 1. That's all of our duty-free applications. And then you have column 2, which is what we used to call the communist column or the bad guy column, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to ignore column 2 for the moment because nothing of what we're talking about, column 2 is not affected at all. Column 1 is what we would normally look for. And if you were trying to completely avoid duty for whatever reason, if you had a low margin product or you just wanted to try and bolster your overall sales, you might look to try and produce in a country that had little to no duty, because that makes sense. Companies are trying to avoid paying more money. So in the before time, you had these kind of metrics going on. You were looking at costs. You were looking at what we call landed costs. What's it actually cost to physically bring it to the U.S. and put it in a warehouse, right? And at that point forward, then you could determine, okay, this is what my additional overhead's going to be. This is what my logistics cost is going to be. And then you come up with your margin and everything was fine. And whether you made it in Vietnam or you made it in China or you made it in Europe, the tariff rate would be the same. Didn't matter. Now, there are caveats to this. I'm making this super simple because you have other things that come into play, anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, things like that, which we're not getting into.
Yeah.
We're keeping those off the table for now. So if you are a trade nerd like I am, congratulations. Good for you for calling it out, but we're not talking about that today.
We're not talking about it right now.
What we're talking about is what happened as of Liberation Day, April 2nd. I'm not even going to go into the China IEPA stuff, the Emergency Economic Presidential Action that occurred. We're talking specifically about the IEPA specific to reciprocal tariffs. So what this now means is that regardless of what happens in column 1, regardless if you have a free trade agreement, which gets you out of column 1, you will be paying a flat rate of percentage based off the country that you're coming in from, based off the country. Let me rephrase that. The country of origin. So you could build it in China and then ship it to Mexico. And if it doesn't change in any way, then it's still country of origin China. You're still paying.
Which was what one of the things that I've read is that one of the big eye-popping numbers that was seen on that first chart was this like 48% to Vietnam. And since then, the rationale for that was, because they didn't want China to say, cool, we're just going to route all of our ships through Vietnam. They wanted to cut that off at the pass.
Well, even if they did route all the ships through Vietnam or do some kind of what we like to call what we call a darn it, the word's not escaping me. But anyway, what we call it's basically a deadhead. You drop a load off in Vietnam, it sits in Vietnam, and then you ship it out of Vietnam. That doesn't matter if it doesn't change some way, shape, or form to qualify for what is traditionally called for U.S. Customs it doesn't substantially transform or substantial transformation. Then it would still be country of origin China. And there are very specific rules that are laid out for certain commodities, and other commodities. You kind of got to look at the provisions to see how that works. I don't think that would be an effect at all, quite honestly, because most everybody, when the first Trump 45 administration came in and they put the additional 301 tariffs on China, several countries moved immediately out of China to Vietnam. That was the number one go-to spot, was Vietnam, closely followed by Thailand and Cambodia. So saying, okay, we're going to jack up the rate with Vietnam because we don't want China jumping to Vietnam and just throwing product into Vietnam, I don't think that holds as much weight per se on a practical argument, because companies were already there. Nike had moved pretty much everything out of everything out of China and moved it to Vietnam immediately, along with several other companies.
All right. So this dramatically changes what somebody is going to pay when they come in, and we'll stay out of the good side of this, because your job does not affect whether or not, if somebody is upset, they're going to build factories in America or they're going to find a way to source what they need from America. This is really this is the stick. This is not the carrot.
Correct.
The other thing that I would see is probably, bringing pain to your life right now and your entire industry, is that we also don't know what's going to happen in the next 12 hours, let alone day, let alone
12 minutes.
12 minutes. In the intervening time that we started talking on Discord to figure out when we're going to do this interview, there was a brief, gigantic rebound in the market because there was a rumor on Twitter that Trump was thinking about a 90-day pause to the tariffs. That was not true. That was literally just a random Twitter rumor. And then Trump says, in retaliation to China's retaliation, now there's another 50% on top of the already heightened tariffs, which I believe some people were doing the math at. That is now 104% of a product that would come in. So my question to you is, right now, I would just imagine that nobody is putting in any order because they don't know whether or not it's going to be a money loser for them. I would assume everybody is just kind of heading to the Winchester and waiting for this to all blow over, at least to the extent that it could.
Well, we're seeing that with certain manufacturers. So, for example, in the automotive industry, we're seeing that with Audi. Audi's big automotive brand. They don't have any build presence in the United States whatsoever. They have said, we're going to hold off shipping anything to the United States until we can get this a little more sorted out. We've seen that with other companies as well that have said, okay, we're going to hold off. The problem becomes, in all honesty, is when you have companies that are on timelines to meet already placed orders, right? Yeah. So if I'm a retailer and I already, I have to have something on the shelves to sell. Otherwise, I'm pointless. If I'm an automotive plant, I have to have parts and equipment in the U.S. so that I can build a car or build a subcomponent of a car. Finished goods may lag a little. We might see higher end luxury finished goods lag. That would be my guess. Lower end items that you're not going to stop produce from coming across the border. We need to have fresh tomatoes, fresh avocados, fresh fruits and things like that. we need to see those things. And I think we're going to continue to see those things. I think what we will see is those prices will go up because the tariffs are going to get passed along to the end consumer. It may not be as dramatic as 34%, because I think some companies are going to try and play a hedge game, but I do think that's going to happen. I think another misnomer, and I've seen it on Discord, I've seen it on various different places, is that these tariffs, they don't impact the American consumer, they impact the country that they're shipping from. That's a bald-faced lie. I'm just going to tell you now. That is just not how tariffs work. I'm not sure why the administration is pushing this, because that's not how it works. The importer of record, which is typically a U.S. company, it can be a foreign company, but it's typically a U.S. company, is actually the one that has to physically put the cash up and pay for these duties to U.S. Customs. These companies are putting money up. That money has got to come from somewhere. It's not going to come from a deep pocket. Now, some companies are going to take this as a leverage and try and play games. And maybe they don't pass 34% from China, but maybe they pass 14% from China. Maybe they're going to take a slight haircut and try and make things happen. I know other companies that saw the writing on the wall once the November elections were done, and they said, we're going to push as much product and inventory into the U.S. as we can in the first quarter. And they're sitting on inventory now, but that's not going to help come third or fourth quarter when they have to ship more out. So I think you're not going to see a dramatic effect right this second, but you are going to see an effect, and it trickles down, especially to retailers, because retailers know at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to have to pay the wholesale price to be able to put these items up for market to sell to you as the consumer. And so I think it's not something that we have to say, oh, well, it's that other country's concern. That's not how this works. And we also see this in technology. I know, Justin, you and I are really involved in the tech scene when it comes to news and reporting with regard to tech. I'm seeing several chip fabs and manufacturers turn around and just say, we're going to hold off making except the bare minimum. We're going to hold off making the bare minimum because A, why would we want to pay additional duties and taxes? And B, why would we want to even do this when it's changing every 5 minutes? So that's the big thing that I'm looking at right now in this moment. And again, this might all be different by the time that we publish this episode. But part of the disconnect is you are talking to fields that are inherently thinking year by year or in multi-year arcs, like at the most minute that your field looks at things is quarter by quarter. Like that's as far as the map goes. If you even do that, but yes. If you even do that, but that's as far as that's as quick as your field goes. And what we're talking about right now is something that is genuinely evolving minute by minute. And so on one hand, you can say, well, if Donald Trump has this grand vision that American exporting, which is, I think, if you were going to put a more academic spin on the otherwise kind of just red-blooded populist rhetoric, American exporting has been hobbled. American exporting to the rest of the world is something that has been that needs to have more access to it. And so we are going to reorder the global economy. But if you're going to do that, you need to do it as fast as possible because it's not going to happen brick by brick in some kind of grand free trade agreement, because in Donald Trump's mind, those are just ways that other countries are going to shave things in their direction and they're going to cut stuff down. Now, whether or not that actually happens, if Donald Trump has this vision, the only way that it can work in the way he's doing it is quickly. I can't imagine what this looks like if it goes on several weeks. I can't imagine what this looks like if it goes on several months, especially the stuff that we're seeing now where it's 34% with China, then it's 50% with China. So now we're at 104% of what,
up until a few years ago was our number one trading partner. So now we're just saying to everybody who planned on buying things from China, which again, we're talking businesses have outlaid, made plans, hired people on the idea that there were fixed costs for years, for multi-year arcs on these kinds of things. That is an unrealistic decision if it goes longer than, I mean, I would say, you know, a few weeks. I mean, even then it's like, I feel like every day affects 4 days in the future. And the more you stack these on, the longer you're going to have and the more profound you're going to have a disruption.
So the rule of thumb, I'm going to go to my other hat for a second here, which is logistics, right?
Yeah.
The rule of thumb that we always have is if there is a port closure, let's say there's a West Coast port strike or an East Coast port strike, is for every day that there is a strike, it's a week to clean up.
Yeah.
That's the rule of thumb because it will take them that long to figure out where stuff went, where it was supposed to go, how it was supposed to be restacked, order and priority and things like that. I think every day that this goes on, I think a week to a week and a half it's going to take to clean up.
Yeah.
That's probably, you know, if we wanted to say 10 calendar days, I think that's a fair assessment. The other thing to look at is, to an extent, yes, that is correct. Probably what would happen is exactly what happened with Section 301 tariffs, which was costs went up in China, so everybody moved their production to Vietnam or a different country. And it became, and I warned about this back then when it happened, that it would become a game of country whack-a-mole. And rather than play a game of country whack-a-mole, he pulled out a sledgehammer and just basically shattered the whole game, which in some ways, okay, that makes sense. But in other ways, you know, I don't think it's going to get him what he wants. If you look at the metric that he came up with for this, or not he, and I shouldn't say he, it's not Trump, it's
the
team,
team,
the administration.
It's him. He's the one who held up the sign on purpose. So
it's Lutnick's people over at Commerce. But if we look at how they came up with these percentages, they even admit themselves to even, and it's on the U.S. Trade Rep's website, if they wanted to try and calculate an actual reciprocal duty for every single country, it might be impossible. So they came up with this formula, which is erroneous at best. It doesn't work. I've looked through it. Several other people on YouTube have looked through it as well. Economists have looked through it, and it's confusing to everybody. But what they,
because it was based on trade disparity, right?
No,
it wasn't
based off of trade deficit, not even disparity.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
deficit, which is a big difference. So when we talk about trade deficit, so let's look at a good example. I just was watching a YouTube video just a little bit before this that was talking about it. They used New Zealand as an option. New Zealand, our deficit with New Zealand is something like $1.4 billion. It's not ridiculous, but it's there, right?
Yeah.
But that's because New Zealand does stuff that we can't do or we don't do, right? New Zealand can turn around and make a certain type of wine because of the climate that they have, because of the capability of growing grapes that they have there, et cetera. Could you make wine in the U.S.? Absolutely. We make it here in my home state of Ohio, but it's a different commodity.
So the argument that I've seen is that, yes, obviously, Americans love to buy things from around the world that cannot be made easily in America, right?
Sure.
And if it is hard for the things that America does make to get into that country, then that is a sign that they do not want foreign interference, or otherwise we would be a bigger manufacturing player. And the meta point, and this is where I think everybody who is involved in global trade kind of gets the queasiest, because this goes from a wow, what a crazy week to, oh my God, we need to actually reorder the entire world's economy, is if, no, we really do want to have a bustling manufacturing sector here. And that means that part of the reason why we have a deficit is because we don't have the factories humming to sell the things that they would want over there. And at that point, that's where you get into much more of a, well, I can understand that you might want this, but I might also want to have a horn on my head, and it's going to involve some very, very tricky plastic surgery for me to do it. And it might not be as pretty as I think in the concept, because then we're talking about, okay, well, how cheaply can we compete on the world stage with whatever we want to do? Part of the reasons why prices are so low across the world are for reasons that Americans don't want to touch, up to and including wage and environmental concerns, which are probably the two biggest reasons why America, at least for some of these things, we don't have the kind of manufacturing base that we would otherwise, because we don't want to do it as cheap as they do, and we don't want to do it as dirty as they do.
Well, it's also, we can't afford to do it as cheap as they do. So let me talk about price for a second. I don't want to talk about the environmental aspect of it for the moment, but we'll talk about the price aspect. A former employer of mine, whom shall remain nameless, but if you know who I am, you know who it is. We actually did an analysis at one point and looked at what would it cost to make just a glove in the U.S.
Yeah.
What's the cost?
Garment.
Right. Well, specifically a glove, because if you're in the North, you know what a glove costs. You know, you can go into a grocery store today and pick up a pair of gloves for $1.25 to $2, right?
Yeah.
And that's just what we call those magic gloves. They're cheap. They're whatever. If you were to take a standard glove, which probably runs you about $25 for a decent pair of gloves, and try to make that in the United States, and then put it to retail, it would cost about $60.
$60 to produce.
To sell.
Oh, to sell. Gotcha. Okay. So by the time that it gets to the consumer,
by the time it gets to the consumer, you've gone from $25 to $60. We did this on a specific pair of slippers we tested, and our price went from a very decent margin pair of $40 to $50 slippers. The cost with very low margin went up to over $100 for a pair of slippers.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you look at it, when you look at the overall aspect of things, yes, it costs less money overseas and labor is cheaper overseas, because labor is cheaper overseas. They don't have the wealth and the resources we have on one hand, but on the other hand, they have different resources, which makes it much more affordable to live.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't turn around and say, well, the wage in the U.S. should be the same wage as in Ethiopia. Well, that doesn't make sense. The wage in the U.S. should be the same wage as in Portugal. Well, that doesn't make sense.
Well, and also it's like, I feel like that's an argument that is like just not, that's not even had. I mean, like otherwise America would understand itself to be the richest country in the world, as opposed to, you know, how we do think of ourselves, which is certainly not that.
The most loathing country in the world. Yes.
Yes.
But I think when we look at it overall, we have to consider the fact that as this progresses, as these changes progress, we will see a rebalancing and a reshifting. So my question has been, okay, you know, there's talk between Vietnam and the U.S. There's talk between the U.K. and the U.S. I mean, these are all rumors.
The EU came out today and said that they have offered a 0 for 0 tariff environment and stuff like that, which is, again, this is where, and nobody knows this. Nobody knows except for one man with a long red tie in the Oval Office. And we don't know whether or not this is Donald Trump's, in many people's minds, and I would include myself among them, very ambitious in a negative way plan to bring back every manufacturing job that exists around the world into America, which we would find out very quickly unless we were also going to reorder everything that has to do about minimum wage and safety standards and environmental stuff. If you also want to say I'm eliminating the minimum wage and I'm bringing back child labor and I'm doing this all by fiat, federalism be damned. We are going to put in the National Guard to open up the factories and let 8-year-olds sew in whatever conditions the company wants. Unless we are willing to do that, then the more likely scenario that I have seen is that on some level, we get a reduced tariff environment for exports. Donald Trump gets to say, I've reordered the global economy. And in many ways, he will have. He will probably have affected more global change, with the ability to do it. And at some level, we figure out that there is probably more manufacturing that we should be doing in America. And there are places where it does make sense to do it. Mm-hmm. Garments, probably not one of them. Sewing, right. Probably not one of them. But either for national security purposes, like we found out with COVID, or for other stuff, there should probably be more. And automotive manufacturing is one of them. And there's a reason why a lot of foreign companies have built factories here, because it is just going to be easier, better, and faster and cheaper. But where is that line? And that's the one thing that I think everybody is panicking about right now, is that right now Trump and some of his allies are talking about that line is like 90% of America, of the global manufacturing needs to be in the United States, when in reality, where I think it's going to settle, I hope it is going to settle for the world's economy's sake, it's probably somewhere maybe 10%, 13% more than what we have. There should be more manufacturing jobs, but not the world's manufacturing jobs.
So couple things to point out here. I'm going to start with this because it's top of mind and I don't want to lose it. Is just so everybody is on the same page here and I don't get any emails or nasty threats or anything. Child labor is a big no-no. You cannot import into the United States with child labor. There is something called indentured labor and the criminal labor. I'm trying to remember what the FCPA is the technical term for it, but
we rely on our trading partners to enforce that.
No, we rely on U.S. Customs to stop goods that are coming into the United States.
And who reports the foreign entities that are on the other side of it?
So Customs does audits. U.S. Customs.
So Customs will go out and see.
Audits.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
They will do physical audits on that as well. It's not just 100% relying on what other countries are telling us.
Yeah.
Correct. So U.S. Customs goes out and they will do these physical audits. They will look at paperwork. They will go and physically inspect plants and things like that. So just so everybody's aware, criminal labor, child labor, forced indentured labor, those types of labor, that is a big no-no. Now, at what point is somebody a child to an adult? That varies country to country, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole nother story for another day.
Yes.
Not getting into that whole ball of wax. Second thing, I would think that, in my opinion, this administration took a shotgun when they needed a scalpel. That's my personal perspective on it. I think if they would have targeted and done more with the 232s like they initially did, which was to say we're going to put an additional tax on automotive and automotive parts. We're going to put an additional tax on steel and aluminum. And they were to target specific industries that they were wanting to go after. Yeah. I think that would have been a much more normal course of action. The problem is that to pursue a 232 action, which those are, you have to actually, do research and do studies and go through a process and have a plan.
Yeah.
Where in this case, it does not appear to me that there was much of a plan. Donald Trump on the White House schedule, if you look at the schedule for April 2nd, They were having meetings up until 11 to 11:30 that day.
Oh, there's a reason why this didn't leak. Is because by all accounts they didn't know.
Exactly. I mean, that's my personal.
Like this information was among the most coveted information that you could find from every factor of it, and it did not leak. Nobody said anything until Donald Trump held up the board, and that's because they printed the board 5 minutes before he went up there.
And I can tell you, the minute that board was seen on camera, I, along with everybody else, was taking snapshots and trying to read it and figure out what the hell it meant. Because I don't think the research was done into this. I don't think the background was done into this. They took a shotgun to a scalpel approach. Which is,
and that's, if I'm going to play devil's advocate on it, the argument would be you can't do a scalpel. Every version of the scalpel version is either doing one part of what he really wants, or it is just going to be something that is going to be circumvented by way of country whack-a-mole or X, Y, or Z, blah, 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 blah. The argument is we want to create more manufacturing in the United States by way of two vectors, either A, leveling a playing field in terms of the economics of how much it costs to import, and then creating more of a market for American exports that are right now in the mind of the White House being treated unfairly by fairly rich foreign markets in Asia and Europe mainly. And you can't do that scalpely. That has to be one gigantic bomb that then gets renegotiated. That's their argument. Now, I don't know enough about this to have any idea whether or not that is. I would strongly agree to disagree, but that's just me personally saying that there's no limit on how many 232 investigations you can do or release at any one given time. And then here's the other side of it that really frustrates the heck out of me. Hold on. Let me push back just a little bit on it. All right. So let's say you do 1 million of these small investigations. Sure. We've seen what the noise is around this. Like the one thing that I do understand from their perspective is that it's like, you better do everything that you were going to do immediately. Because if you go piecemeal, then it is just going to get louder and louder and louder, and the stock market is going to react in whatever way that it is going to react. But the noise around it will be so cacophonous that you can't go one bit at a time, because that kind of stuff does not stay under the radar. I'll give you that. I will give you that. I guess from my perspective, and this is just the compliance person in me. Yeah. I like data. Show me where the real data is to put the data together for this. And there's no data. And I realize I sound like Andrew Heaton when I'm saying this. I'll praise St. Heaton when it comes to that. But I have to see data. I have to see how the data was developed. And I'm not seeing it here. The other thing that I don't believe that it, is anything other. I mean, that all of my priors on this, all of my sense of it, and granted, I am only looking at this through the political lens and the way that Donald Trump has created crises so he can make deals. That is something that he has done his entire life, that he did as a real estate developer. He would look for big, loud problems that he could jump into and say, either I solved. And if there wasn't any big, loud problems, he'd create a big, loud problem so he could say that he solved it. And so I guess my question with regard to that then is, let's say we have and I don't know the number. I don't have it up in front of me, so please don't write in and yell. But let's say with Turkey, we have a 20% reciprocal tariff, and Turkey says, you know what, we're going to have free trade with the United States. Yeah, and so we get into a free trade agreement with Turkey, and the 20% gets knocked off. That doesn't change the trade deficit, which came up with this 20% number. Yeah.
That doesn't change anything. Nothing gets changed other than, okay, now we have free trade from Turkey, which means we're either going to import more. They're not likely not going to import more from us, but we're definitely going to import more from them. So I don't see in the big picture, from my perspective, how the numbers came together to add up to this. And from a data perspective,
that is one thing that I don't know. I have no idea. And to be totally honest, the longer that we've spent in this crisis, and I've been trying to do my best to find people that are smart, that make sense, that I am looking for on this. I don't know if anybody knows, because it's trying to prove a negative. Is that, would American exports be more popular? Would people import more from America, even if it is a luxury item comparatively? But would an American product do better if it were in a free trade environment around the world?
I think some would. Like Levi's jeans would do exceedingly well. Wrangler jeans, heck, back even in the Cold War days, the biggest selling commodity in Russia was American blue jeans. I mean, that was a huge deal. Is that going to completely revolutionize manufacturing in the United States? No. And to say it's going to bring back jobs, I know one predominant athletic shoe manufacturer. I won't say their name, but I know one that brought a plant and built a plant in Georgia. You know how many people are working in that plant? 4. There are 4 people in that plant. Yeah. The rest of it is all automation. It's automatically making shoes. So I don't see where this huge job growth is going to come from, because if it's going to come back to the United States, it's got to make sense. And if it's got to make sense, it's got to be low labor and high machinery. It's easier to turn around and justify a capital expense, because at the end of the period, that capital expense is going away. Yeah. You can't do that with labor because it's an ongoing cost. So I don't know. If I was a soothsayer, I say this all the time. If I was a soothsayer, I'd be sitting on a beach somewhere drinking a Mai Tai. But unfortunately, I'm not. I'm sitting in this chair dealing with customs every single day. And it will be a colorful ride, I'm sure, even between now and when people listen to this. Big Jim, where can people find you on the internet? Best place to find me is at thetradenerd.com. But in all honesty, this is just between us. You really want to talk to me? You really want to know what's going on? Jump over to the jury Discord. I've got my own little section there called Ask Big Jim the Trade Nerd. Yep. I tell you what I know. If I can tell you. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you. I'll find out, and I'll give you an answer. But
that is bit.ly/jury Discord, JURYDISCORD.
Join us. It is fun. It is a good time to be there. And if anything, you can ask for more Pixabella like I do.
Yeah. And I throw them up there. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Justin.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. News is moving fast. The next podcast that I do will be a Substack exclusive. So if the reason why I am putting this out is because I'm afraid that big news is going to break, then that means that the time that news breaks, the next show I will do is a Substack exclusive show. And that doesn't mean that I want to hoard certain news one place or the other. There's plenty of it to go around. It's just which vent it sifts through. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss it, there's only one place to go, and that's TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Sign up at the $12 level. Well, there's only one level these days. We used to have multiple levels. We don't have multiple levels anymore. Well, we technically have a few. Anyway, just $12. It's that easy. We're not worried about weekly anymore. We're not worried. It's just $12. It breaks down to roughly $3 a week. $3 is about the cost of a cup of coffee these days. If you'd buy me 1 cup of coffee a week so I could sit in your car 4 days of the week and give you my opinions on politics, well, then it's a good deal. That's fair dinkum. And then, of course, we have it even cheaper at the $99 a year option. I mean, at that point, we're at about like $1 Less than $1 a week, right? No, more than $1 a week, 52 weeks, but not by much. I mean, at that point, you're basically making me a cup of coffee. If you would make me a cup of coffee so I could sit in your car and I could talk to you, well, come on, look, what are we doing? And in that scenario, you're only making me a cup of coffee once a week. The other 3 days of the week that I'm talking to you, I'll bring my own. That's teamwork. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Let's get to some stories that we did not have a chance to get to. The United States Supreme Court on Monday night in a 5-4 decision lifted a lower court's order that had blocked the Trump administration from utilizing the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport suspected Venezuelan gang members. The administration invoked this rarely used law to expedite the removal of alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang, detaining them in Texas with plans to deport them to a high-security prison in El Salvador. The court ruled that while detainees are entitled to notice and an opportunity to challenge their deportation, such legal challenges must be filed in Texas, where the detainees are held, rather than in Washington, D.C. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, criticized the administration for attempting to bypass due process. President Trump praised the ruling as a victory for border security, and officials like Attorney General Pam Bondi and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem expressed intentions to intensify deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. The ruling marks the first use of the act since World War II and highlights the ongoing debates over presidential immigration powers and judicial oversight. So, a big win for the Trump administration over a DC judge that had blocked this. I mean, look, guys, listen to me now. Believe me later on. I told you guys 2 weeks ago that all of the respect the judges stuff or the impeach the judges stuff was stupid. We were going to get to the Supreme Court, and then we were probably going to get rulings that are favorable for the Trump administration based on the makeup of the court. So, you had some surprises. Amy Coney Barrett did not vote for this. Justice Roberts did, but hardcore MAGA folks can just take their turns being mad at either Roberts or Coney Barrett, and that'll be what it is. The reality is that the Trump administration gets a win here. This was a law that many felt was not going to hold up. The idea being that you would have to expel a foreign army, and so now you are defining a street gang as a foreign army. But the one silver lining win that you have for those that are disgusted by this is that the Trump administration does need to have more of a process to let these people know that they are going to get deported, and then they have the ability to contest it. That being said, contesting it in Texas and not contesting it in Washington, D.C. is a whole different ballgame. A whole different ballgame. The Trump administration is planning a June 14th military parade through the streets of Washington, D.C. to mark the Army's 250th anniversary. It also happens to be Donald Trump's 79th birthday, a senior administration official confirmed to News Nation. Washington City paper first reported the parade, noting that it will stretch almost 4 miles from the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia to the White House. An Army official confirmed the parade's length, and there are plans for the parade that will involve the Army. This is all, of course, according to The Hill and News Nation. The official noted that the Army planned to celebrate the 250th anniversary with a robust capacity increase from what you would have seen in previous years. Sometimes Trump likes to really lean into the steer into the skid when it comes to the authoritarian stuff. But Yeah, he's like there are things that Trump has long been fascinated with. I believe he saw like a military parade in France and went ham about it. Was just like, oh my God, this is great. Why don't we have a military parade like this? So now he's going to get it. Let's swing across the aisle here. The House Democrats have released a list of seats that they are targeting in 2026. The list includes 10 seats that Trump won by over 10 percentage points in 2024, with House Democratic leaders projecting the environment will be very favorable and enough to catapult them in even heavily Republican territory. Some of these might be what we refer to in the industry as lies. A lot of bluster that they're not really going to spend money on these seats because that money would be, throwing it into an incinerator. But still, they're saying it now because they believe that what is happening now, the economic anxiety that is happening now, will indeed get worse. It will trigger a recession. There will be rampant unemployment, and everything will be drawn back to the Trump administration, and everybody on the Republican side of the ledger will be culpable. And I think that they will have a case for it if indeed that does come to pass. Some of the seats that Democrats are zeroing in on are Representatives Andy Ogles of Tennessee, Andy Barr of Kentucky, and Monica de la Cruz of South Texas. All those districts were won by Donald Trump by between 15 and 18 points. So again, they are not taking off the table. They are sunny and optimistic on the fact that the country will be in an absolute Mad Max level hellscape, because that's the only way that you can win seats like that. DCCC Chair Susan Del Bene said, House Republicans are running scared, and they should be. They're tanking the economy, gutting Medicaid, abandoning our veterans, and making everything more expensive. In short, they've lost the trust of their constituents, and it's going to cost them the majority. Of course, along with that list are a lot more reasonable seats that are always close, no matter what, including some that were in districts that Kamala Harris won, including Mike Lawler of New York, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, and Don Bacon of Nebraska. And that's your update. TakePoliticsSeriously.com, where you need to go if you want to get more. But let's get to our pal, JD Durkin. I'd like to welcome back to the show JD Durkin, and he has often joined us from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. He is not now, and I would imagine that if you're only listening via audio, just imagine that he is being wrapped by one of those Mylar blankets that the police put around surviving victims, because he has been witness to a bloodbath over the last 72 hours of trading time. Bring me into this world. What is the vibe on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange since Liberation Day, when Donald Trump brought out that fateful board filled with terrifying numbers?
Well, the real answer in terms of, I think, the broker dealers who have been on the floor for many decades is, the short answer is no one cares. They've lived through so many ups and so many downs. Yeah. Not to mention that the personal politics of the brokers are now a bit more in the public eye. A lot of pro-Trump voices down there at the New York Stock Exchange. But in terms of the broader conversations with analysts and, advisors who cover both the fundamental space and then the technical analysts who look at the charts and the RSIs and the moving averages and all that cool stuff. Obviously, I think there is a lot of frustration at the lack of answers and the lack of certainty. Because as we know, inherently, the stock market is a forward-looking instrument. And so you make your investments across the market with hope for the future that dollar you invested is going to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. And I think the big challenge for all these companies, Justin, is it's nearly impossible to give forward-looking guidance or forecasts or give you a sense of what's to come in the future when I also don't know how much the cost of everything that I need for manufacturing is going to be. And that could change from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And that's kind of where we're at.
And did today, when, we had Big Jim on earlier who was talking about the logistics of shipping and tariffs and stuff like that. But right before we recorded that interview, which all of this is on Monday, we should make that clear because we're going to try and get this out as soon as possible. But the market rallied in spectacular fashion this morning on a Twitter rumor, on a totally unsourced Twitter rumor that had to be slapped down by the White House, at which point it crashed again. It seems like the market at least wants to find a bottom. They just need any reason, which is why we saw that rally based on Twitter detritus. But it's just going to keep kind of spiraling until we find some sort of, positive news, right?
A lot of people discovering that a very popular Twitter account from a dude whose name is apparently Walter Bloomberg has nothing to do with Bloomberg, the news source. And, a side note, can I have a very quick soapbox, as you and I being longtime political media guys are?
Go ahead.
This is the exact day that has most worried me about the Elon Musk era of Twitter. And it was not to say that those of us like you and me, because we're like the old guard of blue check marks back when they only gave it to like journalists and public figures and legit newsrooms. But this was why that system worked. Maybe it was imperfect and you felt like an outsider and you're like, I want to be at the cool kids table, and I get it. But today is why there was that at least some degree of verification. So you didn't have to question where jabroni tweets and things were coming from. And I just pulled up the chart, and it was an intraday swing in the S&P 500 of 8%. That is an incredibly volatile session. Like a 2% change in intraday between 9:30 and 4 o'clock is considered a lot. And you stack up a few 2% days and you say, wow, that's a really volatile market. But an 8% swing looks like trading about 48th on a Twitter rumor. Right. And so we had this like mega spike back up into positive territory and then nothing to verify. And that tweet had alleged that Kevin Hassett and President Trump were considering a 90-day pause on tariffs. The White House very quickly responding to that, saying not only is that fake news, but in the afternoon, we're going to double down and we're going to slap even additional tariffs on top of the retaliatory tariffs from China. And I did listen to the president's remark in the Oval Office a couple hours ago. He was like, doing what he was sitting there with Netanyahu, and reporters come in, they yell all these questions. And he's really doubled down on it. So that Twitter part is really frustrating. But to your point, it shows how desperate the market is for any little sense of good news, a reprieve, some little silver lining. Investors are very good at finding that silver line amid bad news. But, really since the close of business, Wednesday, Thursday, it's been brutal. And I think the expectation is, at least in the short term, for that volatility to continue.
The one thing that I wonder, and I am a very, very, very sparse retail investor like that. Like I've invested in like 2 companies in my lifetime, but even I start to look at some of these numbers and you're like, I mean, at some point, someone's going to look at Apple and Amazon and Nvidia and all these companies that have been, chugging along, that seem as if they're going to be cornerstones of the economy no matter what, and say, well, at these numbers, you should probably look to buy it. I guess it's just really people looking to time the bottom as best they can. I mean, if the S&P 500 is jumping 8% on a Twitter rumor, it does seem like people are like, oh, any kind of good news, that's the bottom. Let's invest in this now that it's cheap.
Yeah, and I think the expectation had been, and I am no financial advisor. This is just my pure speculation, just kind of knowing the intersection of Trump and the markets, kind of where I've been situated for a while. But my sense was always, as he started to make announcements, even low level announcements, like, hey, we struck a deal with Cambodia, with Laos, with all these random countries that suddenly we were paying attention to on Wednesday night for the first time. You're like, really? All those countries? I think getting China to heal is the ultimate goal, and that is the big one, and that's not going to happen.
That is a big dragon to wrestle.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's probably the one the market most wants answers of. But my sense was, once these even relatively lower stakes kind of concessions started to get announced, that we would start to bounce back up. To your point, about the NVIDIAs of the world, these are the sorts of moments where no one exactly knows where that bottom is, because the phrase you hear all the time on Wall Street is no one wants to catch the falling knife, because prices could fall another 10, 15, God forbid, another 20%. Like that is a reality. But if the fundamentals of the companies you like have not changed, and you liked NVIDIA when it traded at 135, 138, 142, then you probably really like NVIDIA now that it's down to $97 a share. Obviously, the macro environment's challenged. So these are the sorts of moments, more broadly, not day to day, but people say have your shopping list. Understand, always have your few key reasons why you're looking to get back into a name. And to your point, you'd imagine the institutional names are going to back up the truck at some point. But the problem is they're not likely to unless we get a whole lot of more certainty. And that's in short supply right now.
And that brings us to us trying to play the guessing game of how does this end and when might it? And the way that I see it, and you fill in anything that you might think, is there's really only two ways that as a Trump studier, I see this ending. Either number one, Trump has said, I've believed since the 80s that high tariffs are a better thing for the American economy. Everybody says I'm wrong, that I can't onsource manufacturing back to the United States, but they're absolutely wrong. The United States can create more jobs for people that have been hollowed out and than anybody believes that we can. And even if we're only selling to ourselves, it's better off doing it than importing cheap goods. And that means that we are in a financial meltdown, the likes of which we haven't seen in a very long time in terms of institutional investors, as everybody has to rip up the way that they have understood the world's economy and refigure exactly how worthwhile America is. That would be a bloodbath for investors, people with 401ks. I think that basically means that the market is in a free fall, probably at least for the rest of the year. But I don't think that's going to happen, because Donald Trump is somebody that does watch the market a lot. And what I think is a little bit more likely to happen is what he has said today, that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is now going to go talk to Japan, and the new golden age of global trade is about to dawn. And they kind of like the fact that internationally all the other markets crashed over the last 24 hours, because they want them to show up and they want them to make a deal. And no matter what that deal is, Donald Trump's going to call it the greatest deal. He's the man who reordered international trade, and everybody else is just swimming in that lake. Is there anything that I've missed, or which of those two scenarios do you find more likely?
I find the second one more likely. No, I think it's good. I think there have been so many questions about like what really is the end goal of Trump here. Trump shared this video on Truth Social that featured a very fake Warren Buffett quote. By the way, Berkshire Hathaway had to put out a correction.
Get into this. This is a very big brain thing that Donald Trump shared on his Truth.
Yeah, it's one of these. I just remember the first Trump administration. He used to say, "I did a retweet. Don't yell at me. I didn't do anything wrong. I just did a retweet." Right? I just someone else made something and I don't know, I saw it and I just threw it up there, right? Absolved myself of responsibility. But someone basically made this video trying to really explain what they thought Trump was really kind of really doing with the tariffs and this and that. And it featured this jabroni quote from Warren Buffett saying, "Oh, I'm actually a really big fan of President Trump's tariff policy here." But, I think among the big questions is, at least in that video that Trump supported, it seems like he does want to weaken the dollar. He wants to bring oil markets down. He really wants to see interest rates fall, not just the natural ones that have fallen, but he's openly putting pressure on Jerome Powell and the Fed to lower the Fed. At least short-term policy, short-term monetary policy. And of course, historically, we have this kind of air of Fed independence, even though the Fed chairman's nominated by the president, approved by the Senate. The chairman still does his work just in a very data dependent way. And the data does not really support a Fed interest rate cut. That's really the big problem, is that if the Fed's going to have credibility, Jerome Powell over and over again has said, really our target for inflation is 2%. The metrics have gotten close. They're still 2.5, 2.8, 3.1, depending on which one you're looking at. The other thing that would cause the hand of the Fed to do what I think Trump wants is cut interest rates is a very rapid deterioration of the labor market. And so there's an unexpected spike in unemployment that happens. That's why we watch the jobs reports very carefully. But for the most part, it really seems like that labor market's been in healthy balance between supply and demand. So all that to say, it doesn't really seem like Trump gets what he wants on that last part. And then the rest of it is, I think, a lot of traders say, or people I talk to, they're like, this is a lot of Trump's ego. He likes that, unlike the crash of 87, unlike the great financial crisis sell-off, unlike the dot-com burst, unlike COVID, those are all external factors that came in and rattled the markets. They were anomalous in their own different ways, and they caught people off guard. This whole thing is manufactured by one dude with a lot of axes to grind. And that is what I think one of the more concerning things, because as we know, he could say one thing one day, one thing next, and it's very difficult to know where we go from here when it's up to how the president is just feeling and what side of the bed he woke up on this morning.
I want to go back to that video because the video made a point that I am not in any way. Look, I'm willing to indulge a lot of MAGA theory because I do think that it's probably underplayed if you were to actually add up a healthy, balanced diet to understand our modern world. You should understand the philosophy of MAGA, but this one was too far for even me. The idea was that you would slaughter the stock market, have all the money run to treasuries, then that would make it easier to refinance the national debt, like $9 trillion of which matures this year or next year, I forget which. And so you'd be able to refinance that debt at a lower interest rate and therefore save on at least the payments that we make on the debt because you have to do it one way or another. Now, Trump re-truthed it, whatever it's called over there. So you can't totally take it out of the realm of possibility, but I do not believe that kind of second order financial Rube Goldberg thinking is particularly in the scope. If anything, it's Trump looking on his own website and saying, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. I think I'll retweet that. Somebody should think about that."
Hey, that's a really good one. Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, wait, that's a new one. Someone's giving me credit for. Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, that's the ultimate 4 or 5D chess. Ultimately, yeah, I think I think there have been a lot of structural challenges. And I always I've been sitting there the last week saying, all right, what could I say that's kind of to Trump's credit? And obviously, I think where we're at monetarily with our relationship with China is unsustainable because their economy is contingent on selling cheap shit to Americans. Yep. And we continue to borrow money from China to afford to pay for that stuff. And so for the globe's two biggest, most important economies that also have an adversarial relationship, their weakest parts are too reliant on the other. And so structurally, if this is all kind of a pivot towards changing how we view geopolitics, how we view where in the money supply we're overly reliant on other countries, that's kind of what I come back to. And I'm like, I think the president repeated this earlier this afternoon, that he views this as a once in a generation, a once in a lifetime opportunity to redo those structural imbalances that are under the system. And a lot of people have been concerned. Economists have been worried about how much the government spends relative to how little it takes in tax revenue. And the gulf in between that continues to grow and grow. And at some point, there's probably a breaking point to be worried about it, but we just don't know what it is, being the globe's dominant reserve currency the way we are, and our spending and debt levels, which are huge. And so I'm trying to find those little things where I'm like, well, maybe he's kind of doing this just to always kind of ground myself. It's like the MAGA economic version of what you're talking about for politics. It's good to engage with it and try and figure it out. It just really seems to be befuddling most voices in the world of the economy.
Here's what I kind of keep coming back to. I made this point with Jim in the first interview. He was saying all right, tariff wise, you could do 1 million of these small tariffs that would be far more targeted with things in China for which you could protect, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, sure. And look at what's happened over the last 2 months, where we had a an adversarial relationship with Canada, an adversarial relationship with Mexico. We want different things out of them because we share a border, but also there's an economic question of exactly where are things manufactured that are going to be very close to get into the American economy, which is the envy of the world in terms of money and trade. It was very loud, very, very loud. Meanwhile, with this stuff, I kind of feel like on some level, you can only go big once. Like if you're going to start renegotiating stuff with China and Europe, like if you really want to say, hey, since the Marshall Plan, we've had bad deals with Europe, we're going to do new deals. We have been, ever since China joined the WTO back in the 90s, we have been on the wrong side of the coin. This should have been changed decades ago. I have to change it now. I don't think you can go piecemeal. Like realistically, politically, from just a political point of view, the noise is going to be so loud, the market is going to be so reactionary to it that if anything, creating total chaos is probably getting out cheaper than if you were to do it one stage at a time in terms of market freakouts. That being said, I do think it's unsustainable. I don't know if this can last more than a week or 2 weeks before you start to really put permanent damage and permanent strain on the American economy, because we're in a it's hard to think about this right now, but when you're talking about some of these companies, this is like cancel Christmas period, right? Like they're making decisions on stuff that are on the short term about the Christmas buying season, that are on the long term wondering, well, do we pull up roots from all this? And the fact that everything can change in 5 seconds doesn't help them make those decisions. So I think there's going to have to be some kind of northern light, for people to follow. There's going to have to be some kind of Star of David for people to walk closer toward, because I don't know whether or not, even if you're going to big brain this and say, okay, you had to go big or go home, you had to put up the big board and panic everybody if you were going to get anybody to do anything, you still can't live here. This can't be a permanent state of being.
Yeah, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase just put out his annual letter in the last day or two. And his big concern about this was similarly how you laid out, Justin, which is the idea that, these can probably be absorbed by the system for a very short amount of time. But if this existing tariff policy and uncertainty were to last too long, like even a matter of weeks, then you start to really do damage and set these companies back a long time. And Dan Ives at Woodbush, he's known as one of Wall Street's go-to perma-bulls. He's always got a positive argument for Tesla, positive argument or outlook for Apple. He really believes in the strength and growth opportunities of those mega giant companies. And he says that the entire tech semiconductor space is at risk of being set back a full decade in terms of the U.S.'s current prominence because of this exact reason. If this goes on for too long, those companies can't do guidance. And then to your point about the sectors for retail that are looking ahead to Q3 and Q4, which, as you said, the holiday shopping season, so important to retailers. It's the automotive giants who already carved out basically a personal favor from the White House. Hey, could you delay tariffs for 30 days? That's ahead of Liberation Day. This was like February into March. Hey, could you give us a carve out for 30 days? Because we have no idea how we're supposed to go about this, because cars get made in all three countries together. And then the agricultural space, manufacturing space, obviously a lot of sectors and companies that have exposure to China. Apple, Qualcomm, Tesla, AMD, NVIDIA is a big one. These have been the darlings of the bull market the last few years and the names people have talked about the most. But in a lot of cases, these companies make 20% of all of their money out of China. And they don't know if they need to raise prices on consumers. Do they need to absorb the cost of the tariffs, in which case that probably impacts their earnings, which is going to impact their share price and their forward forecast anyway. It's just such a muddled mess of confusion. And it's really made much more complicated for all those companies that do business in a very global way. And in today's manufacturing landscape, all these companies, I think it's one thing for the president to get behind the microphone in the Beltway or to do a Trump rally in rural America and say we're going to reshore manufacturing. And that sounds great, but that's just so at odds, I think, with the modern system of global based manufacturing, even for American companies and corporations. The companies we say, hey, that's a great American brand, Caterpillar, great example,
Sure,
down in Texas. Like everyone loves Caterpillar. What's more American than Caterpillar? Well, they make 10% of their money in Asian markets. So, the impact to even U.S. home brands not knowing the answers and where this goes is severe. And, the market lost $5 trillion. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. These numbers, after a while, they have a way of just like, they make our eyes glaze over. And I don't know that the average person realizes how big a trillion is. Like a trillion is a million. So that we lost $5 trillion over 2 trading sessions. That's a ton of money. When we say the federal government spends $6.5 trillion, these are enormous sums of money that are almost difficult to comprehend. And we're watching that real value, at least right now, disappear and be on shaky terms by the day.
Yeah. And again, it's like, I think with the market, unless you start seeing totally new guidance and like there are companies that are saying like, look, we're just going to, for our survival, we have to either, run down what we're going to, what we thought we were going to do. We're going to have to announce these gigantic prices, whatever they're going to do, unless they start really, really, really making moves as if this is the new normal, then the market, I get a sense, will rebound depending on what the new, version of reality is. Like we saw, there's a hunger for it. There is a desperation for it that is in existence right now. But I don't know. It's the thing that I keep coming back to is I think Donald Trump wants to be the deal guy more than he wants to be the now your son or daughter can screw iPhone screws in, which is like every once in a while, whenever I talk myself into the idea of like, okay, well, maybe you want to know what, Donald Trump's never going to be the elegant thinker, but maybe he's the brutalist thinker that, we've kind of lost. We've been in this min-maxing world for our entire lives. We've never thought of somebody to just say, no, screw it, pull the plug and then beg me to put it back in. How much would you beg me to put it back? What would you give me to plug it back in? And then you have Howard Lutnick on the Sunday show saying we're gonna bring back iPhone screw jobs to America, and it's like that's not a good job. Nobody's gonna want to do it for the price.
That wasn't the answer. We voted for cheaper eggs, dude. What are you talking about? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I do think that there's a realm for greater manufacturing in America than we have. And I do think that that's probably a broadly popular idea that even if it's necessarily not cost efficient, COVID showed us that we need certain things that do not have international supply lines. And especially if those international supply lines can be cut off by China or are in China, right? Like there's a certain element that's there. But it's not everything. It's not every garment that's sewn. It's not every smartphone that's screwed together. It is. There are some jobs that will just exist beyond the United States if we want to not have things cost either drastically more, or there's always this option, I guess. We can drastically reduce environmental regulations. We can take away the concept of a minimum wage, and we can just say, let have it, but I don't think that, if we have NIMBY issues now, I don't think that a gigantic industrial zone is going to go over really well. And I don't think that reducing a minimum wage is going to be a popular thing with the MAGA base, which is a lot of, wages, people who work for $1 an hour.
Yeah, I think Made in America sounds great, and it is. I believe it. I think it's great when consumers aspire to shop in America, but you very quickly recognize the challenges of actually manufacturing in America. And I was just taking a look. I mean, we also can't forget. I mean, the stock market, February 19th was the all-time high of the stock market. Like this is one of the additional concerns is how quickly we have fallen off. And I looked at this today, Justin. You and I saw each other 4 weeks ago today down in Austin. It was a Monday night. The market's down 12% from the morning that I saw you. That is just such a fast amount of time for all this to happen. And here's probably my single biggest question as I listen to the White House argue this. And this gets into the politics of this, which I'm trying to stay focused on when I can, which is I'm hearing two arguments being made at the same time, and I don't think they go hand in hand. On the one hand, I think the president is looking for concessions. He's looking for Canada to help with the flow of fentanyl, Mexico to help with the flow of illegal immigration. Maybe he's using a pressure point on China to try and make a deal for TikTok. He's trying to get and score political points that aren't necessarily tied to the economy, but he's using tariffs as a way to get there. And then with that is implicit the argument that, okay, well, if you come to the negotiating table and you make your shit here and you do what I want, I'm going to relax the tariff policy. But on the other hand, the president's also arguing for this idea that we are going to use tariffs to make all this big, beautiful federal government revenue. But to me, you can't have it both ways, because you only make substantial revenue if you keep the tariffs in place. But you're not going to keep the tariffs in place if you get the other concessions that you want. And the most generous estimates that I've come across, and if you've seen something better, or if anyone's seen, please send to me. The most generous estimates I've seen say, best case scenario, the U.S. can bring in $100 billion this year, or $100 billion a year based off tariff revenue. And that is still less than 2% of all the money the federal government spends, because to my previous point, $100 billion sounds like a lot of money, and it is a drop in the bucket compared to $6.5 trillion. Like it is such a massive gulf in between what we're spending as a government and the little teeny bit of little extra revenue maybe we could bring in by imposing current tariffs across the board. So
can I give you this is a little
imbalance? Yeah, please.
A little Trump whispering.
Oh,
so in that Netanyahu meeting, he made mention, he's been saying this lately, we are bringing in billions and billions of dollars worth of tariffs. Now, the tariffs that he announced on Liberation Day don't go into effect until the 9th. So at the point that he is saying this right now, they have not gone in. And he made the point to further clarify, billions and billions are coming in on tariffs already put in. So if I'm going to do a little bit of big brain Trump whispering, I'm looking for the talking points he'll settle on when this is over, even if it's him standing pat, right? And what I'm starting to hear are things like the golden age of global trade. That sounds like something that came right out of Donald Trump's mouth. I am hearing we're bringing in billions and billions in tariffs that we already put in back in 2017 and Biden didn't take away. So he's always going to be able to say, we did both. We brought in billions and billions of dollars in tariffs, and maybe there's some baseline that does go up that's palatable to the market, that there's like some kind of baseline 10%, or he leaves a high trade barrier on automotives or something like that. Like there's probably, I don't think that there's any way, even if we saw broad repeals of a lot of these tariffs, that we're going to get back to where we were before Liberation Day. I think that there are going to be some of these things that do stay around, at least on some level. But that's where I'm thinking. I'm watching him for the, like, what is going to be the thing he says at a rally at some point, that here's what I did. You can even hear right now the rally speech version of like, everybody was calling me. I couldn't keep up. Everybody was ringing. Hello, Macron. Hello, Starmer. Hello, Xi. Like that, you can already kind of hear that, but I just think he's gonna make a deal because he wants to make the deal. That's always what he wants. That's his natural place to be. But I do think you're right. And this conversation has brought me more to this point. It's China. He can't blink on anything until China blinks. And he wants that pain in their stock market. He wants that instability because in China, they have a different world. Like in America, the stock market can tank and a bunch of bankers can be really, really mad at Donald Trump. And yes, a bunch of citizens are going to be mad because they're 401k. But in China, the government and the economy are one, right? Like this is a different scenario over there. And so I don't know. Maybe that's it. This is all about Xi, and it's always been about Xi from the very beginning. It doesn't matter what the EU says or does. Doesn't matter what Laos and Cambodia and that island that is only penguins says or does.
Poor penguins. Penguins are like, the fuck did we do wrong, man? Come on, give us a break. So it's actually, so I wonder if I have it here. Oh yeah, I do. I want to see if I could take this off without busting down the whole board. Well, I don't know if you can see this one. So this particular, so for people who can't see, this is like my old press badges. Yeah. This one here it says signing ceremony of an agreement between the U.S. and China. And this is from towards the end of Trump's administration. And this whole press badge that I have was a very ornate, very well presented, relatively benign announcement after the first iteration of tariff tit for tat between Beijing and the Trump White House. Further underscoring all this to say, I think you're right with your idea that, like, what does he really do? He wants to make a deal and he wants to stand there and do it in the Rose Garden, have it look beautiful and say, he campaigned saying, I alone can fix this. And he wants a celebration and a victory lap to say, I alone did this. And this, to me, when I really remember, I think back to the events at the first Trump White House I covered, that's when I always stuck to me and I was like, this is just optics. There is really no announcement, right? Because they didn't even have the thing announced. This whole thing just says signing ceremony of an agreement. That was the official language because there really was nothing to announce. And so I would absolutely expect, and we'll get Japan, maybe we'll get Canada. They're all going to make their just like when Trump, after the election, everyone went down for their regular kiss the ring visits to Mar-a-Lago. Everyone's got to come kiss the ring at the Rose Garden, do a whole ceremony. Look how big and beautiful that is. In the process, maybe that gives the markets a little bit more answers. But I could not agree more that I think largely the end goal is that he loves, you and I talked about this last time I did your show. He loves that Congress has largely ceded tariff authority to the executive. And he's sitting there and saying, hey, this is a negotiating pressure point that I don't need Congress for, even if I got willing Republicans down there who, for the most part, are, I think, still backing him on this. Been some chatter, I feel like, from GOP members who aren't thrilled with the tariff impact. He's got enough.
I mean, that's why people are like, I'm like, look, he's got a voting majority in both chambers right now of people that are kind of ride or die for him, or at least do not want to challenge him. And that's a material difference compared to his first term, because there were enough people in both of those chambers that would be below the voting threshold that believed MAGA was a phase. And like reality television shows in the 2000s, they were not. MAGA is the new normal. It is what is happening. And now this time, nobody is of the belief that MAGA is going away, that they need to talk to this. This is the new coalition of Republican voters. They love Trump. They trust Trump. They want you to back there. And so that's the reason why he can wield this club, is because there's not an organized revolt amongst the Republicans to say, there's grousing, there's a Rand Paul here, there's a Ted Cruz there, there's even an Elon Musk running around saying that this is a terrible idea and that we need to set up a free trade zone immediately. But he's going to be able to, I think he's got another 2 weeks max. Like that's where I think the dam really starts to break in terms of patience, that he can say, I'm doing a deal, I'm doing a deal, I'm doing a deal. Or I'm not. But he's got to, if it's not in the next 2 weeks, I think that's it. We have a new reordered global economy and we have no idea what America is worth.
And how it plays out. Dude, it's so funny. We've gotten this whole conversation that I've been chatting about Elon Musk, which is fascinating because I wonder to what degree there's been just speculation again. Has he kind of been quieted? Maybe we're just not really, we're not hyper focused on the Doge stuff like right in this particular news cycle right now because of how things have gone. But obviously he has been top of mind for a bit. But for Musk to come out and say the free trade thing with Europe and kind of distance himself from the Trump administration on that issue is noteworthy. And he has been more willing to say, he has said this on Twitter, that Tesla is not shielded from, obviously, their revenue exposure to China is enormous. Tesla's not going to be spared by all this. Now, Trump has actually been asked, and he's like, well, I think net, this is going to be a positive thing for Tesla. And Elon Musk is very quick to kind of like, we're probably caught in the worst of the tariff back and forth. But the Musk's Trump stuff is still fascinating, even if during this current market sell-off, that chatter's been quieted a little bit, but suspiciously, I think. I wonder.
I mean, nobody that has been involved with Chinese dominant manufacturing is a fan of it. Even if they believe that, wow, it would be easier and better if we could build more stuff here. And some of those products are high margin enough that you would like, there to be, like semiconductor fabs are better jobs. They're not sewing gloves together and stuff like that. Like there are good jobs that are to be had. But this is a process that needs stability. Nobody is going to build a bunch of factories in the United States unless they are damn sure that they absolutely have to. Nobody is going to recalibrate what their product is worth and whether or not they need to eat money that they were otherwise making to stay competitive unless they absolutely have to. And, there are a few people on this planet in politics that are more comfortable in chaos than Donald Trump. And that means that he can't stay there forever because the rest of the world and really the rest of America is not going to like it in the way that we didn't like it during COVID. Like that was the time we wanted him to kind of calm down a little bit. He didn't. Now that was a presidential year, but I'm not with the doomsayers today as we speak, Monday, April 7th, that are like, well, this is a black mark. He signed his death warrant. This is over. You can't see a man-made drop in the stock exchange like this. I think if in a week he's saying, look what I did. Oh, look at all these things that I got. And now we get to do this and now we get to do that. And John Deere is selling to, more tractors to Norway or whatever. Then it's like, okay, like now he'll have a press release every 5 seconds about a thing that didn't happen before that now can happen because he is the president. But otherwise, it's going to be dark. I mean, it's dark now. So he better hope he can bring the light.
Tracking tractor exports to Norway is going to be a really fascinating leading indicator data point for me to follow the next few weeks. I don't think you're wrong. I mean, we've had some suggestions, some companies like Honda and Volvo, they've said, well, we were going to, we had this plant planned for Mexico. All right, we're going to move that back to the US. But the other things, even as we had those, before all this real market insanity the last week or so, we had those announcements from people like, I think Peter Thiel was involved. We definitely had Sam Altman from OpenAI went to the White House, make a big announcement. The runway for capital investment to be realized is years. These things don't just start. Now, you could also argue, well, part of what Trump's trying to do is ease the regulatory process and make permitting much more easy. I hear that from a lot of people. And that's all well and good. But that doesn't just immediately, there is no switch that can so easily be flipped. All those manufacturing jobs flood into a community in a matter of days or weeks. And I think that wait and see game is going to continue to frustrate a lot of people. But it's been fascinating to watch people like Bill Ackman and a lot of other Trump supporters either go relatively quiet or start to come out and say, hey, hold on, folks, maybe actually, maybe we should consider a little bit of a different policy because this is a shit ton of money.
But that's the other thing is that that also plays into Trump, right? Because if Trump makes a deal, he's going to say, look at all these weak-willed people. Look at all the reason why we were in the situation that I had to do what I did was because everybody else wet their pants. When the heat turned up, they didn't stand by. They didn't make the deal. That's why I'm the only person who will unplug the machine and then take bids on who will let me plug it back in. Like that's the difference. And so that's why I think for his base, for the MAGA base, oh my God, that's catnip. That's folk hero status. And so, but the question is that his real plan? Or does he really believe that everybody should be sewing their own clothes?
The point of plan, I listened to Besant's interview with Kristen Welker on Meet the... I don't know if he did all the Sunday shows. I don't know if he did a full Ginsburg or anything.
They all spread out this week, but Besant was on Meet the Press.
The divide and conquer. All right. Well, I caught his and, I'm listening to him. I remember the day that he was announced. Wall Street got a nice bump. I thought, all right, the street got their guy. That was sort of the perception of the type of Treasury Secretary you want. Someone who had enough of a skeptical past in terms of his public comments on non-targeted tariffs and non-tariff, barriers and this and that. And I'm listening to him yesterday. I'm thinking, is this the job he thought he signed up for? Or did he expect this? Did he know it'd get this choppy this early and he'd be forced to go out there and defend it? Or is he kind of like, yeah, you know what? I wanted to be Treasury Secretary and didn't quite expect this was going to be part of it, where I got to go out and justify all these things that I don't know if he really believes in. But as we know, and anyone who's watched The West Wing, I serve at the pleasure of the president. Every member of that cabinet, no one's ever going to say, in too aggressive a fashion, I disagree with the president. More so you hear, I'm not going to get ahead of the president, or I'm not prepared to make an announcement, because honestly, I don't really think they really know how he's going to feel about all this in even a matter of days. Well,
we will keep an eye on it. JD Durkin, where can people follow you?
At JD_Durkin. And you can also catch me at my local watering hole Friday nights. If you walk into, it's a little divey hole in the wall here in Western Queens. So if you happen to find me there, I'll buy you a drink. But otherwise, JD_Durkin on all socials, and mostly every day at the New York Stock Exchange, except for after hours like this. I get to come home and put on my Mylar black blanket. So thanks for having me, brother.
That's it. If you didn't watch the video, there's just been red and white lights ambiently behind him as he sips a cup of coffee that was given to him in a paper cup with a Mylar blanket the entire interview.
Not to get into spoilers, but Severance fans will know there's some dramatic red and white lighting in the second season. And if you know what I'm referencing, then that's kind of what it's like every day to try and track what's going on with the markets.
JD, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, brother. Good to be with you.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics is written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. If you'd like to email the show, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. You can, every once in a while, I post clips from the show. Kara Markowitz last week said that we should do a clip of the show comparing the NPR CEOs back and forth with the Austin Powers clip. So I did it. And that's on my Instagram, Justin R. Young, my Twitter, Justin R. Young, and it's on our shorts on YouTube, Politics. Of course, you can always support us with a one-time donation. If you hit us up, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash. And you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. Of course, you can always get our bonus content at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Paying members get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. That's $12 a month. Breaks down to $3 a week, which is nice. But of course, you can always get our annual plan. That's under $100. That's $99. 150 episodes of the show for under $100. Cheese Louise with cheese. Our founding tier is the only way that you can get your name read on the show, however, which is what we do right now. L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes. Oh yeah, it's Adam. Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, The Borge Bee, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Stephen, and Zombie Doc. If you want your name read on the show, one place to do it, TakePoliticsSeriously.com. On Friday's edition of the show, we go a little deeper into our book club of campaign 2024 books. It is Revenge by Alex Eisenstadt. This is unlike Fight, where we talk to Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen. Revenge is focused squarely on the Trump team. So where I thought that Fight was excellent and is a must read if you want to understand how Biden devolved, not only in front of the camera, but behind it, power wise. Revenge is similarly important to read because Fight was a little light on some of the Trump stuff. The reality is that Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen are phenomenal reporters, and they did get good Trump stuff, but They're way better sourced with Democrats than they are with Republicans. Alex Eisenstadt is the opposite. And you get brought into a very interesting world. A very, very interesting world. Including the world of the human printer. Which we will talk to Alex about. A fascinating, fascinating person. Anyway, that's Friday. Bonus episode Thursday for folks who subscribe on Substack. But until then, it's your old pal Justin Robert Young saying, some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.